James, President Trump will take this as a great victory, won't he? He has managed to negotiate the start of a deal through the talks that he spearheaded.
That's right, Jane. It's interesting. Michael's talking there about the return of Ukrainian children. That clearly is a central issue. It has been an issue here because with all these US federal government cuts, one of the agencies having its funding taken away has been a Yale University program central to the tracking of Ukrainian children. That has created a fear in Ukrainian circles that the United States was giving up on what it regards as one of the very important principles in moving forward on any agreement. So that will clearly be welcomed in Ukraine. I'm struck, and I wonder what Michael thinks of this. I would bow to his expertise. But Ukraine talking about, and indeed its defence minister tweeting about how it would welcome the involvement or the good offices of third countries with a view towards supporting an implementation of the energy and maritime agreements. I wonder if it can be read into that a Ukrainian mistrust, perhaps, or a growing mistrust of the United States, given the recent history and given the behaviour of Donald Trump leading towards Moscow and the behaviour of the likes of Steve Witkoff and the people, the point men involved in talks with the Russian. Steve Witkoff, I can tell you, who is this property attorney, the Middle East envoy for Donald Trump, who got a result over Gaza, has been deployed to Moscow, has met with Vladimir Putin, of course, a couple of times, and waxed lyrical about his face-to-face meetings with Putin. He's been roundly criticised across the United States by right-wing media, organs of the media, surprisingly, because of the kind of things that he has been saying about Putin, the way he has characterised Putin, his meetings, the Putin philosophy, talking, very much talking in kind of Russian terms about a way forward, being seen to be too close to Putin in the way he talks about an agreement, the principles, the ambitions moving forward. So surprisingly, this right-wing figure has been criticised by right-wing media. And, I would mention as an aside, Steve Witkoff, he's somebody on this Signal group chat. There are questions being asked here about his phone when he was in Russia meeting Vladimir Putin. What were the security arrangements there? What was the access potentially for Russians to his phone, to what may have been classified information? Because I think it's fair to assume the Russians will be all over Signal and attempts to try to hack in to that Signal app, particularly when you have a US envoy in town.
James, thanks so much. Very briefly, Michael, just going to get your response to that. I mean, what did you think?
Yeah, and James is absolutely right. Umarov has said, they would welcome third-party involvement because clearly the Ukrainians feel that they're not going to get an American guarantee, or if they do, it'll be a very implicit one. So if anyone else can offer them some guarantees, and I'm sure he has in mind there the main European states, whether or not that's practical is a different question, but I'm sure that's what he meant. So I think, no, James is exactly right. I mean, the Ukrainians are casting around wherever they can find the possibility of a guarantee for whatever is maybe agreed in the next few weeks.
Well, let's get a wider European perspective on the ceasefire in the Black Sea now from one of those European countries, Lithuania. The country's defence minister, Dovile Dakalien, joins us now from our Westminster studio. And my enormous apologies if I've mispronounced your name. Very good to talk to you today. What is your response to this breaking news that we've just heard about an agreement between Ukraine and Russia in the Black Sea?
Well, in my opinion, agreements like that should be taken very carefully, because so far Russia has a history of never, ever being able to keep any international agreement. So therefore, I don't really have 100% hope that we are going to do this time, that we are going to have such a novelty. And what is very important is to ensure that if this happens, then it does not become a breather for Russia to accelerate accumulation of military power to speed up its military industry, because I don't think anybody believes that Ukraine was the end of its imperial ambition. Now that we have a battlefield-trained huge army, and they are still completing their army reform with a plan to have 1.5 million soldiers in just a few years.
And in terms of third-party help, third-party involvement from Europe, if we feel that America is pulling back from assisting Ukraine, do you think, your country, other countries can really step up to fill the void?
We do have to take up more responsibility on this side of the pond. It's not really dignified to be dependable upon United States and not to be able to grow up our own military muscle and to help Ukraine. We need to do that. On the other hand, of course, we do need to keep the transatlantic relationship. It is critically important to all the NATO alliance and to Ukraine as well. What I understand from my American colleagues is that keeping the balance, sharing burden fairly, that is what is the most important. As they said, we are not going to tolerate imbalance anymore. So therefore, if we are able to speed up our military capacity rebuilding and expanding in the next few years, then I think that we would be a viable partner for Ukraine as well. But now, whatever we have, however we can, we need to continue all possible military support to Ukraine. Lithuania is doing 0.28% GDP for Ukrainian support. We are continuing to do that, and we are also participating in discussions about contributing to other formats working in Ukraine.
You talk about the transatlantic alliance being critically important. What do you make of the fact that J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, apparently hates bailing out Europe again, and the US Defence Secretary loathes European freeloading and thinks Europe is pathetic?
Well, the words may be harsh, but the fact is that definitely Europe has not been investing adequately in its defense. When we acknowledge the fact that we are, well, the richest and the most stable region in the world, and then when we look at the composition of NATO expenditure, where United States was bearing and is still bearing the biggest part, then, well, this criticism about free riding, it's not unjustified, it is justified. So the choice of words is one thing, but the actual fact is there.
I mean, Pete Hegseth is your opposite number in the United States. Have you spoken to him since he came to the role?
I'm sorry, did I speak to Secretary Hegseth?
Yes.
Yeah, we had a phone conversation I think over a week ago, and we discussed this partnership, the teamwork with the countries that do understand the necessity to invest in their defense. And I think that having in mind that Lithuania is second after Poland with the defense funding, we have 4% this year, and we plan to go to 5.5 on average since next year. So this is what I see as solid partnership, and he also agrees that this is what is really important, to contribute as much as you can and to really be able to work together. Then all parties must do their fair share. Again, United States have been consistently saying that they do not plan to leave NATO. What they want to have is Europe's fair contribution, and that, I think, also is really justified.
Given this signal conversation that was leaked to a journalist, are you still confident about Lithuania sharing security information with America?
Well, this really unhappy incident does not probably change the most important thing about United States. Their military capacity, their defense industry capability, their strategic intelligence capability. And in that, we do have trust in the United States. What is the most important is that, as I said, again, we put our money where our mouth is, and we work as hard as possible to have immediate and significant rise in our own military capability.
Dovyl Sakalien, Lithuania's Minister for National Defence. Really good to talk to you today. Thank you very much for joining us on that breaking news. Thank you. Well, let's return to our defence and security analyst, Professor Michael Clarke, who's in the studio. Interesting getting her perspective on what's happened. You know, not at all offended, it seems, by what the Americans have said, quite bullish, pointing out that Lithuania, after Poland, does put the highest proportion of its GDP into defence.
Yeah,
for a little
I mean,
country.
the northern states, I mean, Poland, the three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and the Scandinavian, well, Finland certainly, and not so much Sweden at the moment, but they do put a lot in terms of GDP per capita. And they, the problem is, but the fact is they're very small, so they can spend a lot on defence, and that's good for them, but they're never going to have big defensive forces. Poland is different, with an army of, 110, 120,000, and it's modernising a lot. So Poland's a pretty big player. But on the other point that she makes, I think it's quite interesting that, you know, I think most of the European powers have realised that this time round, the Trump administration will be very sceptical about Europe, and there is a style there which is very assertive, which insults all of its friends, almost as an act of power, really, just to show how powerful they are. They can rubbish all of their friends, and the friends still have to remain friends. That may wear off. I mean, this is the first flush of Trump, 2.0. And I think most Europeans, although publics might get annoyed by it, I think most politicians just assume that that's the way it is. And it may not be that way all the time, but the Europeans all acknowledge that the Europeans have been complacent for the last 20-odd years, and that they should have done more, and they are now doing more when it's very late in the day, but nevertheless, they're doing more. Even if they'd done a lot more 5 to 8 years ago, I think the Trump administration would still be saying the things that it's saying now. I think there's more, there's a sort of deep, visceral sort of sense that the United States and the Trump United States and Europe are on sort of divergent paths. And so I don't think that would make that much difference. But they're philosophical, as she was being there. We're not going to be rattled by this at an official level. And although European leaders will keep going to Washington and keep playing to the Trump's vanity and this sense that we have to recognise the importance of Trump as a president, I mean, things will change with him. And not, on the law of averages, he disrupts so many things that some of them will turn out to be better for it. It's not all bad, but a lot of it's bad for the Europeans, and they've just got to weather it. Getting upset at language is probably not a good thing to do anyway. I think that's what she was indicating. You've got to be grown up about these things, even if they're not.
Well, let's return to Washington and our US correspondent, James Matthews. Any more response to this breaking news there, James?
Witkoff is interesting, Jane, and in terms of response, the key question will be to Donald Trump about Steve Witkoff, the man that he has appointed to negotiate directly, face to face, with Putin. And again, I remind you that Donald Trump is due to appear in front of the cameras around about 6 p.m. your time. So in terms of reaction, keep your eye on that one. Questions will be difficult for Donald Trump on the back of the way negotiations have gone. And we've been speaking about the difficult set of choices that are faced by the Ukrainians, and ultimately little choice but to proceed on the shoulder of Donald Trump, however unsatisfactory that may be. And we get a sense of how unsatisfactory that is. When you look at a podcast interview given by Steve Witkoff, the negotiator with Putin, with Tucker Carlson a couple of days ago, at which he parroted a number of Russian talking points. He pointed out that there were areas, territories in Ukraine annexed by Russia, and of course there were elections there at which the populations supposedly voted to retain that Russian ownership. Witkoff said, will the world accept that these people want to belong to Russia, which has been widely viewed as an alarming and extremely surprising thing for somebody to say, somebody who started out as negotiating on behalf of a Ukrainian ally. Witkoff, in this podcast interview, that's also the interview where he said that Putin said that when Trump was shot, he went to a local church to pray for Donald Trump, not because he was president, but because he was his friend. And that was also the same interview where we heard about this portrait that Vladimir Putin had commissioned for Donald Trump. I mean, I think the general reaction here has been, did you really believe in the sincerity of Putin when he came away with that stuff? And I think in Ukraine, they will be aghast at the notion that this key negotiator on whom their future relies is buying this, from Vladimir Putin, a seasoned KGB operative who clearly knows the buttons to push in terms of impressing Donald Trump and pulling Donald Trump in his direction. So, that gives you a sense, Jane, of the person, the point man involved in these negotiations. And it casts light, I think, on why Ukraine has a fundamental mistrust of where the Americans are taking them, a mistrust that can only grow with time. In spite of that, of course, progress is being made. There are discussions being undertaken, however unsatisfactory the Ukrainians may view them right now. I mean, I think right now they're looking at the best of a bad set of circumstances moving forward.
Let's return to Professor Michael Clarke, who's with me here in the studio. And that's a fair point, isn't it? That perhaps Ukraine hasn't achieved a great deal in this particular bit of the negotiations, but it's better than the alternative.
Yeah, they have to stay in it because they don't have many options. As President Trump said, you don't have any cards. And if the United States doesn't back Ukraine, it certainly doesn't have many cards. It's not completely without some, because it does have quite strong European backing, but that European backing is not good enough for what the Ukrainians really need in the next year to 18 months. But so the Ukrainians got no alternative but to stick with the American process, to welcome every bit of it and keep on hoping that it will lead to somewhere that a sustainable truce. It won't be a peace deal, but a truce that somehow will last for 18 months, 2 years. Maybe it will last the whole of the Trump presidency. If there were a truce, it might be in Putin's interest to say, look, we'll observe the truce. We've got other targets of our ambition. And while Trump is in the White House, we can achieve some of those things. We won't embarrass Trump by upsetting the deal that we've got in Ukraine. That's possible. So the Ukrainians are, in a way, that they're not just clutching at straws, but I think that they're in a position where they don't have any alternative but to keep welcoming whatever progress there is and backing it, even though, as I say, the two items that we've talked about this afternoon are both more in Russia's interest than they are in Ukraine's immediate interest, as stated in that piece that came in about half an hour ago.
While we're talking to you, Michael, we've just got up a map of the Black Sea showing Ukraine, Russia, Crimea, of course, that disputed region, just to help our viewers kind of understand what's been agreed. What can you explain to us about that?
Yeah, I mean, Crimea it's been under Russian control since 2014. Sevastopol is down on that southwest coast, that little southwest tip of Crimea is Sevastopol, which was the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet. And the Black Sea Fleet has been basically pushed out of there now and pushed out to a Russian base, Novorossiysk, right out into the Russian territory. So the Russians are cleared out of the western part of the Black Sea. And then the area to the northeast of Crimea, that's the Sea of Azov. And the Kerch Strait, where the Kerch Bridge is, that little bit of territory there in between Crimea and Russia proper, that's Kerch. And the fact is the Russians control the whole of the Sea of Azov, whereas that used to be a territory that was shared between, or seaway that was shared between Russia and Ukraine. So it's very much to the Russians' advantage. If they can get back into the whole of the Black Sea legitimately, and there is a ceasefire in the whole of the Black Sea, that does them some good. For the Ukrainians, if you think about Odessa, see where Kherson is marked. Well, if you just go west from that to Odessa and Chernomorsk, those are those famous ports, beautiful places like Mediterranean-style weather there, very attractive holiday places and so on. The Odessa Steppes, very famous, and some of the famous Russian films of the 1920s and 30s. And for the Ukrainians, they need to get their grain out of Odessa and the Odessa ports, down the coastline to the Bosphorus, down at the bottom left of the map there, through to the Mediterranean. And the Bosphorus, of course, that's Turkey, controlled by Turkey. They've controlled the Bosphorus under the Treaty of Montreux since 1936. So it's up to them who travels in and out of the Bosphorus in a time of war. Otherwise, it has to stay open, but they get to say who travels in and out. And Turkey's played a very straight bat on this and said no warships through the Bosphorus while there is fighting. And they're very correct to do that. So that's the benefit for the Ukrainians, is that they get more of their material out from the Odessa ports down to the Bosphorus, a bit less hazardously than they were doing in the past. I mean, so far, they've got quite a lot of stuff out. I mean, their trade, at least in numbers of ships, is back up to where it was before the war started. But they have to hug the coast all the way down through the NATO countries, really, the coast of NATO-friendly states. So it's not the safest thing to do, and they'd like to open that up. So there is benefit for both of them, but more benefit for Russia than for Ukraine, if there is a complete, as it were, truce across the Black Sea. We're not sure if that's the case yet. It doesn't sound quite as if that's the case, but it might turn out to be.
OK. Michael, thanks very much for now.